No Premier League team has caught the eye with their transfer business this summer, more so than Aston Villa. That's despite the fact that Villa have only actually signed 3 players, Moussa Diaby, Pau Torres, and Youri Tielemans. All 3 arrive with real pedigree though, ahead of Villa's first season of European football in 13 years. Diaby has long been one of the standout young players in the Bundesliga, previously linked with a handful of super clubs, and he is reported to have turned down far more money to join Cristiano Ronaldo at Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia in order to move to Birmingham instead. Torres has spent the last 4 years as a stalwart in Villarreal's backline, establishing himself as one of the best ball-playing and distributing centre-backs in Europe, and he had been heavily linked with a move to Man City over the last 12 months, at least until Pep Guardiola turned his attention to Josko Gvardiol instead. Tielemans, meanwhile, is a familiar face already in the Premier League, having made 195 appearances over the last 4.5 years at Leicester City. Elegant, gifted and intelligent, Tielemans was long sought after by Arsenal last summer, who may well have gone back in for him this summer were it not for the January arrival of Jorginho. Diaby, Torres and Tielemans join a team that finished 7th in the Premier League last season, qualifying for the Europa Conference League. That accomplishment is made all the more impressive when one recalls that Villa finished 14th the season before last, and they were 17th last season, just 1 point ahead of Leicester City in 20th, with only 9 points from 11 matches when Steven Gerrard was dismissed. From Unai Emery's arrival onwards, Villa amassed the 5th highest points total in the Premier League, above Newcastle United, with twice as many points as Chelsea, and just 1 fewer than a resurgent Liverpool. Emery masterminded victories against the likes of Manchester United, Newcastle United, and Tottenham twice during that time, illustrating all of the tactical nous and attention to detail that saw him win the Europa League 4 times with Sevilla and Villarreal. Combine Villa's post-Emery form last season with their summer arrivals then, the wealth and ambition of their owners, and the sheer size and historical significance of the club, and it is little wonder that people are starting to sit up and take note, whilst 1 or 2 of the so-called Big Six, plus Newcastle, look nervously over their shoulders. So in today's video, following more requests than a DJ at a wedding, I wanted to take a look at the hype surrounding Aston Villa, how Unai Emery managed to turn the club around, what to make of their new signings, and whether Villa really have what it takes to do that oh-so-rare thing when not owned by a state over the last couple of decades, and disrupt the Premier League's top 6 long-term. It is quite remarkable, given the feel-good factor at Villa Park right now, to think of where the club was just a few short years ago. 5 years ago, after losing to Fulham in the 2018 Championship playoff final, Villa were threatened with a winding-up order from HMRC. Over the previous 2 years under new owner Tony Shear, following relegation from the Premier League, Villa had spent £70 million on transfers and a fortune on wages in the Championship. Failure to secure promotion to the Premier League in successive seasons, combined with Shear's own personal issues, left Villa in a perilous predicament. The winding up order from HMRC came after the club missed the deadline to pay an outstanding £4 million tax bill, and a further £8 million was owed to players and staff in salary payments by the end of the month. Villa themselves were hemorrhaging £6 million a month at the time, and with no external funding from Shear in months, the situation really did look exceptionally bleak. 5 weeks after Villa's brief flirtation with extinction, they had themselves a pair of saviours, in the form of Nassef Sawiris and Wes Edens. Sawiris is the world's richest Egyptian, though he spends most of his time living in London, worth an estimated $7.3 billion. Sawiris' father founded the Egyptian conglomerate Orascom Construction, which is the primary source of his wealth, though he also owns a 6% stake in Adidas, minority stakes in the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers, and he, along with Edens, has since acquired a controlling stake in Portuguese Premier League side Vitória de Guimarães. Edens isn't quite as rich as Sawiris, worth just $3.6 billion. How embarrassing. And he also has multiple investments within the world of sport. best known as the co-founder of Fortress Investment Group, which was hammered during the 2008 financial crisis, but has since made a staggering recovery and has almost $46 billion in assets under management as of 2022. Edens is also the co-owner of NBA franchise, the Milwaukee Bucks. The duo allegedly met at a series of conferences and retreats for the super rich. How else are you supposed to meet someone these days? Where they struck up a friendship through their mutual interest in sport. From that moment on, they were on the lookout for football clubs to acquire. First linked with MLS franchises, or an expansion franchise all of their own, which is an idea that they haven't yet given up on. When the opportunity to buy Aston Villa came up, it was too tempting to turn down. Despite their demise, facing a third season in the Championship with an ageing squad and a totally unjustifiable wage bill, and not having won anything of note for the last 27 years, Villa are still the 7th most successful club in the entire history of English football. At the time, they were actually the 6th most successful club, but they have since been overtaken by Manchester City. Villa might have been a total mess then, but they were a total mess with extraordinary pedigree and potential. Whilst less reckless than Shea before them, NSWE, which is the name of the holding company that owns Aston Villa, could hardly be described as frugal. Villa nearly broke even during their first season in charge, and big earners like Jordan Amavi and John Terry were either offloaded or retired, but they still spent the best part of £20 million. The difference being, the money was spent much more wisely. John McGinn, for a fee of just £2.7 million, was always an absolute bargain. And, as I said at the time, just saying, he ought to have had a queue of Premier League clubs lining up to sign him. Villa also made fine use of the loan market, bringing in the likes of Anwar El Ghazi, Tyrone Mings, and most notably of all, Tammy Abraham. Nonetheless, 11 games into the season, Villa were languishing in the bottom half, having only won 3 games. A 3-3 draw with Preston North End at Villa Park, in a game which they had led 2-0 at half-time, proved to be the final straw for manager Steve Bruce. It was the first sign of NSWE's ruthlessness, which has become a recurring theme of their ownership of the club, though you would have done too well to find a Villa fan who didn't want to see Steve Bruce sacked at the time. Bruce was replaced by lifelong Villa fan Dean Smith, who had worked wonders at Brentford, and he led Villa to an inspired final third of the season after installing fellow Brummie Jack Grealish as the club's new captain. For the second season running, Villa made the Championship playoff final, but this time they would come out on top. It's interesting to note that both Villa and their playoff final opponents that day, Derby County, had effectively gambled on winning promotion to the Premier League. Both clubs had spent, and lost, an absolute fortune, and while Severus and Edens might have had far deeper pockets, and have been in it for the long haul more so than Mel Morris, purely in regulatory terms, Villa could have been in big trouble had they not won that match. Even after unlocking the untold riches of Premier League promotion, Villa still had to sell Villa Park to their owners, again, just like Derby did, for £56.7 million in May 2019 in order to avoid falling foul of the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. The stadium is now owned by a subsidiary company, also owned by Severus and Edens. For some clubs, the sale of arguably their most valuable, or at least their most crucial asset, has spelt disaster. But for Villa, so far at least, it has proved to be necessary and effective, if a little controversial tool. In fact, it's hard to think of another club who have spent like NSWE did in the Championship, sold their stadium, and didn't end up with egg on their face. The stadium sale was necessary because Villa spent an absolute fortune following promotion. Though their spending raised eyebrows at the time, in many ways, they had no other option. The Villa squad was ageing, and their promotion had been dependent, in large part, on loanees and players who were out of contract at the end of that season. 4 of the players who started for them in the playoff final, let alone the rest of their threadbare squad, wouldn't be there next season, and 2 of the 7 that would were on loan and would have to be signed. In total, though, Villa spent more than £144 million on new arrivals, the second most in the division, just £4 million behind Manchester United, and the highest in terms of net spend, and after that level of investment, survival was a must. Villa did indeed survive, but not without a hefty slice of good fortune, after the Hawkeye technology, incredibly, wasn't turned on when Sheffield United scored against them, resulting in a 0-0 draw in that game instead of a 1-0 defeat. That point kept Villa in the Premier League. When Severus and Edens bought Villa in 2018, they were determined to bring Christian Purslow along with them. Like Edens, Purslow is the co-founder of a private equity firm, but in June 2009, he was also appointed as the new managing director at Liverpool. Though his time at Anfield was brief, Purslow succeeded in increasing Liverpool's commercial revenue, and he played a vital role in the club being sold. In October 2014, Chelsea appointed Purslow as their new head of global commercial activities, where he negotiated a series of massive commercial deals, along with a record-breaking £900 million kit deal with Nike. Purslow left Chelsea in 2018, and he was planning to take a year out and travel the world with his wife when Severus and Edens reached out to him. Following senior roles at Liverpool and Chelsea, and with trips to New York and Paris already having been penciled in, Purslow took some convincing. Unlike at Liverpool and Chelsea though, Purslow wouldn't just be dealing with the dry commercial side of Villa's operations, but also the big football decisions, whether that be managerial appointments or new signings. That, combined with NSWE agreeing to his demands to be paid not only by salary, but also with a minority ownership stake in the club, ended up swinging the deal. As soon as he arrived, Purslow set about rebuilding Villa, both on and off the pitch. Little things like giving Villa Park a fresh lick of paint and upgrading certain areas of the ground go a long way in football, projecting the outward appearance of a club that is heading in the right direction. Behind the scenes as well, though, big changes were being made. For the first time, proper interest and investment was thrown behind the Aston Villa women's team, the club's academy system was overhauled, and a state-of-the-art new high-performance centre was built at Villa's Bodymore Heath training ground. Aston Villa's women's team won promotion to the WSL in 2020, a year after the men's team won promotion to the Premier League, entering the top flight of women's football in England for the first time since 2004. Villa had the 6th highest average attendance in the WSL last season, above Tottenham and trailing only Arsenal, Man United, Man City, Chelsea and Liverpool during a season in which the club finished 5th. Villa's academy has long been a jewel in the club's crown, but its pipeline to the first team had started to dry up in recent years. Purslow, together with NSWE, overhauled the club's entire youth ranks, removing anything that they felt wasn't working, and appointing West Brom Academy manager Mark Harrison to oversee the changes and run Villa's academy from that point on. In 2021, Villa won the FA Youth Cup for the first time since 2002, beating Liverpool 2-1 in the final. Since Severus and Edens arrived, 30 Villa Academy graduates have made their first team debuts, a record for a Premier League club, including the likes of Jacob Ramsey, Cameron Archer, and Carney Chukwuemeka. Villa have also done a thoughtful and impressive job in the loan market when it comes to developing their young players. Last season, Villa had 10 players out on loan. It's not quite Chelsea's loan army, but it is substantial. None made more of an impression than Cameron Archer at Middlesbrough, who scored 11 goals in 20 games in the Championship, fresh off the back of a similarly impressive spell on loan at Preston. Instinctive, explosive, and lethal in front of goal, it looks as though Archer will stay at Villa this season and fight for his spot in the first team. In Ollie Watkins, Villa had the 3rd most prolific goalscorer in the Premier League during the second half of last season, trailing only Erling Haaland and Harry Kane. Emery put his faith in Watkins as soon as he arrived, illustrating that with a January sale of Danny Ings, which left Watkins as the only out-and-out centre-forward at the club. Emery instructed Watkins to make fewer runs into the channels, to stay central, keep getting in the right areas, and, in essence, to be a little bit more selfish. Emery's team had Watkins study the movement and finishes of Edinson Cavani, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Carlos Bacca, three centre-forwards who had flourished under Emery in the past, and the results have been emphatic. Archer will start the season as Watkins' deputy then, but he won't be content to stay there. Fresh off the back of winning the Under-21 Euros as England's talisman, Archer will want to make an immediate statement off the bench, and he's more than capable of doing just that. Like Diego Carlos, he'll feel like a new signing for Villa. Carlos isn't a youngster, nor has he been out on loan, but following a £26 million move from Sevilla last summer, before Emery arrived at Villa Park, the 30-year-old ruptured his Achilles tendon in only his third game in claret and blue, ruling him out for the rest of the season. He is now back in training and played 45 minutes of football in Villa's recent 3-3 pre-season draw with Newcastle. Carlos, who won the Europa League with Sevilla and the Olympics with Brazil in 2020, is an aggressive front-foot centre-back who loves to go and attack the ball, harasses forwards, and makes full use of his athleticism. He will add to Unai Emery's abundance of centre-back options next season, complemented, most notably of all, by the arrival of Pau Torres. Signed for £31.5 million, there can be no doubts about Torres' talents. At the age of 26, he has been capped 23 times by Spain. Quick, clever, and brilliant on the ball, Torres will give Villa the ability to carry the ball out from the back and force opponents to commit, with Torres more than capable of then slipping a pass into midfield and launching an attack. It also gives Unai Emery something of a selection headache, and whilst that can be a nice problem to have for managers, you can't imagine any of Villa's four centre-backs being happy to sit on the bench. Tyrone Mings, who enjoyed a fractious relationship with former manager Steven Gerrard, was perhaps Villa's most improved player, along with Ollie Watkins, following Emery's arrival last season. Labelled as error-prone under Gerrard, he was practically faultless throughout the second half of last season, and aerially, he is one of the most dominant central defenders in the division. Ezri Konsa, meanwhile, is already closing in on 300 first-team appearances as a footballer at the age of only 25. Unfortunate not to have been capped by England yet, he and Mings have played a lot of football together at this stage, and they appear to have a borderline telepathic understanding during Villa's excellent run of form last season. One suggestion which has been hinted at is the idea of deputising Konsa at right-back and then playing any two of Mings, Torres and Carlos at centre-back. Last season, Villa played what was often billed as a 4-2-3-1 formation, but was really more like a 4-2-2-2, with the two fullbacks pushed really high at the pitch and providing most of the width, with the rest of the team remaining fairly narrow. Matty Cash was sidelined for most of Villa's 10-game unbeaten run, which saw them finish 7th last season, and replaced by Ashley Young. Out of contract at the end of last season, Young, now aged 38, has since signed for Everton. But there are suspicions in some quarters that Emery isn't entirely convinced by Cash. Konsa has played at right back before, albeit not very often, but deputising him there, given how high up the pitch Luca Dean and Alex Moreno like to push forward from left back, would give Unai Emery the option of having a back four out of possession, which switches to a back three in possession, with Konsa slotting in alongside the two centre-backs, and Dean or Moreno pushing even further forward, with someone else providing the width on the right flank. One man who could certainly do that, and this was a beautiful transition, is Moussa Diaby. Capable of playing on either flank, Diaby has played predominantly on the right at Bayer Leverkusen over the last 2 seasons at least, where his speed and directness have been a constant thorn in the side of Bundesliga defences. Lightning quick and brilliant on the ball, Diaby scored 17 goals and made 14 assists last season, hence why Villa faced such stiff competition for his signature and were forced to fork out a fee of between £40 to £50 million. There is another benefit to Diaby's arrival, and that is the fact that he played alongside Leon Bailey when the Jamaican had his best ever season at Bayer Leverkusen. There were those at the time who felt that Diaby was better equipped to make the immediate transition to play in the Premier League than Bailey, but now Villa have signed them both. Diaby is a signing that is worth getting excited about, for Villa fans and neutrals alike, and he will be fun no matter what. But if he can replicate anything like his form from last season in the Premier League, whilst bringing the best out of Bailey, who is yet to really light up the Premier League, at least on a consistent basis, he will prove to be a very worthy club record signing. Youri Tielemans, meanwhile, adds some much-needed depth to the Villa midfield, though he could end up doing an awful lot more than just that. Last season was probably Tielemans' worst at Leicester City, though you could say the same for a number of the Fox's best players, and the reality is that, without that dip in form, he would most likely have been beyond Aston Villa's reach, as there would have been a handful of Champions League clubs clamouring to sign him. One theory is that Tielemans was suffering from a bit of burnout last season. At the age of 26, he has already made more than 500 senior appearances. That is utterly absurd, and you can count using the fingers on one hand the number of players who have played that many games at his age during the modern era. The counter-narrative is that Leicester were rubbish last season, and Tielemans, by no means on his own on that front, just had an off-season. Villa fans will be hoping that it is the latter, and if that is the case, it will look like the biggest no-brainer of the entire transfer window, and there will be an inquest at a lot of the Big Six clubs as to why they sat on their hands when it came up. What all three of Villa's signings do, undoubtedly, is give them lots more options in terms of how to play, and real strength in depth, both of which they desperately needed. The first because Unai Emery is one of the most pragmatic and tactically versatile and inventive managers in world football, and the ability to more easily and effectively change his system and style of play will have been a priority of his in this window, in addition to adding quality, of course. The latter is pivotal because, for the first time in well over a decade, Villa will have European football to contend with next season, which could add as many as 17 games to their schedule if they were to follow in West Ham's footsteps and make it all the way to the final. That's a benefit to Emery in terms of keeping players happy because he can give those who aren't in his strongest 11 at any one time minutes in other competitions, though he won't want to get complacent. Emery's record in Europe is outstanding, but Villa were knocked out in the third round of the FA Cup last season in a 2-1 defeat at home to Stevenage, which was humiliating and undoubtedly the biggest disappointment of Emery's impressive reign to date. Perslow's catchphrase at Villa was, "I'm a man in a hurry," and the club certainly acted fast during his time at the helm. Steve Bruce was dismissed just a few months after Perslow and NSWE arrived. Dean Smith was given just 3 months after guiding Villa to an 11th place finish in the Premier League before he was sacked with the club sitting in 16th, and the one great blot on Perslow's copybook at Villa Park, the appointment of Steven Gerrard, was swiftly dealt with last season. NSWE have proved to be ruthless but rational, and that sense of urgency to get where Villa want to be as soon as possible has permeated throughout the club ever since they arrived. A handful of clubs have broken into the top 6 or 7 for a single season or two over the last decade though, doing so on a consistent basis over 3, 4, 5 seasons is what has so far eluded them all. On that front too, there will be plenty of challenges for Villa. Their revenue, as per the club's last set of published accounts, was just under €211 million. That was less than Leeds United, Everton, West Ham, Newcastle United and Leicester City over the same period, and less than half that of any of the so-called Big Six. Given the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, combined with UEFA's FFP regulations, that means Villa cannot match the spending of the elite teams that they are seeking to disrupt, and will have to find creative ways of competing with them instead. There are those who question, with that revenue, how Villa have so far been able to spend so much. Since 2016, the club has lost an extraordinary £584 million. That has been made possible, in large part, by the £100 million sale of Jack Grealish, recorded as pure profit since Grealish came through Villa's own youth ranks, as was the case with Carney Chukwuemeka as well, who was sold for £20 million to Chelsea. Meanwhile, the cost of new arrivals is spread annually over the course of their contracts in an accounting process which is known as amortization. Throw in the sale of Villa Park and a temporary loosening of financial regulations in recognition of the loss of income that clubs suffered without fans being able to attend games during the pandemic, and Villa have just about managed to avoid any sanctions or punishments. Clearly, the owners are desperate to increase Villa's revenue though, with plans to expand Villa Park's capacity to in excess of 50,000, and their latest shirt sponsors reflecting that fact. One of those has caused significantly more controversy than the other. Aston Villa now have more than 33,000 fans on their waiting list for season tickets. Expanding the capacity of Villa Park from 42,640 to in excess of 50,000 then, in addition to increasing their corporate hospitality, is just common sense. Allowing BK8, an online sports betting and casino market, who have no genuine presence here in the United Kingdom other than a white label website, and seek primarily to use Villa and the Premier League as a way in which to advertise their product to viewers in China, where gambling is illegal, is a little bit more problematic. I have made a whole video about these types of controversial Premier League sponsors, which I would arrogantly recommend watching since it's pretty murky and interesting, but even within that context, BK8 are particularly controversial. That is not just because the 3-year deal that Villa have agreed with them will end just before gambling sponsors will be banned on football shirts in the Premier League from the 2026-27 season onwards, but also because of their prior advertising and product offering. BK8 previously agreed a deal to become the main shirt sponsors of Norwich City, but the Canaries were forced to quickly terminate the deal after fans looked into the company. At the time, BK8 were using their website, YouTube channel, and social media platforms to promote themselves with pictures and videos described as soft by critics. The advertising material included scantily clad models simulating sex, amongst other things, and at that point, it seemed as though BK8 would struggle to find partners in the Premier League. Villa, so keen to scale their revenue though, have provided them with a lifeline, to the distaste of a number of their fans. That is one complaint, and a fairly reasonable one given the circumstances, and I do always wonder what the actual net benefit of such controversial sponsorship arrangements are, given the potential drop in sales if it leads some fans not to buy memorabilia, but overall, Villa fans are understandably delighted with the team's progression and how the club is being run. Purslow departed last month, reportedly on good terms, as part of a broader restructuring of Villa's leadership. In 2020, Villa appointed Johan Lang as their sporting director, but this summer, he was given a new title as Global Director of Football Development and International Academies, as Spanish executive Monchi was appointed President of Football Operations. Purslow's role had therefore been greatly diminished, especially with Emery himself being heavily involved with almost all football-related matters at their club. Sevilla's longtime director of football, those of you who watched my Sevilla video not long ago, will be very familiar with the former goalkeeper Monchi, who was responsible for signings like Julio Baptista, Dani Alves, Seydou Keita, Ivan Rakitic, and Alvaro Negredo during his time in Seville, generating an absolute fortune for Sevilla through their eventual sales. As with Villa's 3 signings on the pitch this summer, Monchi, despite a much shorter and less successful stint at Roma, has long been linked with some of Europe's biggest clubs. One concern for Villa, given the degree of control regarding transfer policy and staff appointments that they have afforded him, is how they would cope in the event of Unai Emery departing. He has earned that trust, based upon his outstanding CV and debut campaign in Birmingham, but it is something NSWE will have to prepare for. Of course, if Emery departs of his own volition, most likely in that instance to take something like the Spain or Real Madrid job, it will probably mean that Villa are in a very good position and well equipped to appoint a very capable replacement. In the event that Emery is removed though, for whatever reason, and Villa's restructuring proves to be somewhat problematic, that would take a pretty significant transition. It has also been pointed out that, for all of their success, Villa did significantly outperform their XG in terms of both goals scored and goals conceded under Unai Emery last season. There will be those rolling their eyes right now at the mere mention of XG, but the reality is that anomalously outperforming XG is very rarely sustainable, and some kind of regression to the mean is not guaranteed, but highly probable. Ollie Watkins, for example, hit the target with 72% of his shots in 2023 to date, a higher rate than either Erling Haaland, 59%, or Harry Kane, 63%. It is possible, of course, that he'll keep that up in the 2023-24 season, but it would be one hell of an achievement, and a little bit foolish perhaps, to take it for granted that he will. Any regression in terms of XG may well be balanced out by the improvements to Villa's squad though, and more time adjusting to Unai Emery's demands. One of the hardest working managers in the game, Emery is relentless in his efforts to find flaws in his opponents, find the best way of exploiting those flaws, and getting the better of his opposite number. There are no better examples of that than his first game in charge of Villa, where he took Manchester United and Erik ten Hag by surprise by attempting to play the ball out from the back before launching direct and penetrating attacks through the middle of the park. And against Newcastle United, where he bamboozled Eddie Howe on set pieces with the speed of Villa's attacks, and by having Ollie Watkins bully the two Newcastle United centre-backs. Villa beat Manchester United 3-1 and Newcastle 3-0, though it really ought to have been 5 or 6. It's that invention and ingenuity, which saw Emery overachieve at Sevilla and Villarreal, that Villa will need to qualify for Europe again next season. With a potentially resurgent Chelsea and Tottenham, neither of whom will have European football to contend with unlike Villa next season, and none of last season's top 6 having rested on their laurels this summer, that will be easier said than done. But Villa have ambitious, capable and super rich owners, a world-class manager, and a feel-good factor about the club that they haven't had for well over a decade. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I sincerely hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on both for this channel and for my second channel, both of which should be on your screens or about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username at HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so. I'm not calling it X, alright?